Okay, thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. Let me try to get the glare off of these scenes right here, but I have 5 different scenes that were stamped out in the previous videos, stamped sketches I call them. And they're waterfalls, and what we're going to do in this video is that we are going to establish our kind of foundational kind of lighting scheme in the scenes and coloring schemes. Now I just happen to color them with 2 different shades of gray, a Memento London Fog and a Marvy just gray. This one represents probably a 15% gray, and this one I'm guessing is like a 20-25% gray. And maybe it's a little bit darker, maybe it's like a 30% or 40% gray as I kind of got into it. But what I've done in these 5 scenes in this video is I've established the lighting within here, and I talk about the retention of light on those falling water areas just for the sake of contrast and drama. You really want those waterfalls to really be kind of the star of the scene, just like they are in any kind of national park or whatever, and that's why, you know, so many waterfalls end up being kind of tourist destinations and the most famous places within a given kind of natural area. Okay, so just coloring in around them. In this case, it happens to be a lot of rocks. Okay. And toning those areas in and retaining a little bit of some variation within these given spaces, but still darkening in the areas around them to really make them pop and stand out, and that's the point of this video right here. Now you can go on, you know, if I was to do these individually, I wouldn't have just gone grayscale with those 2 different tones of gray, but this is certainly a really fast way you can work, and then you can take them into whatever color scheme you want to from there. So I can still do, you know, a Sedona red rock type of you know, color scheme on something. I can go, you know, in this one right here I'd go blue tones because that kind of makes sense with the moon right here, but I can certainly do warmer you know, color schemes in here with some aqua greens and whatever, still right over the top of the grayscale, because the grayscale right here is neutral. Okay, but otherwise I would just, you know, if I was just working on these individually, I would just work them through the color schemes of whatever color scheme I'm going to use within the scene. But grayscale is a fun way to work too, and just to kind of set that foundation for kind of your overall lighting scheme and what it's going to look like, and then go into your colors from there. Okay? So anyways, I hope this comes in handy as far as waterfall lighting and, I don't know, kind of the modeling of form. Okay, we have a lot of stamp sketches here, layouts using the waterfall designs, 5 in total, but 2 of them are half-page scenes, so it's, you know, it's kind of the equivalent of like having 7 cards, you know, because I usually work in quarter-page size formats, standard card size. I'm going to approach the coloring of this grouping of layouts here in kind of an assembly line fashion, and what we'll do is we'll address some basic lighting, and then we'll get into some different color schemes, and I'll do some kind of finishing touches on all of these in separate videos. I think that's the best way to approach this. And let's see, I guess we'll start from just I don't know, any of them. Okay, now what I'm going to do isn't necessarily the way that I work all the time, or I don't know, I rarely work this way, but it's a good way to work if you have kind of a grouping like this, and I'm going to approach it in this manner. In terms of just being able to, I don't know, finish these off in kind of a reasonable period of time, okay? And that's kind of just establishing a neutral base here in terms of the lighting scheme of a given scene, okay? Now normally, I mean, if I was going to make this into a sunset scene or something like that, what I would be doing is I would be working in that color scheme from the get-go. I'd be starting with some warm tones. On this one, I'm just going to start off with neutrals. I'm just going to do gray tones, okay? And maybe I'll move into black, I'm not sure, in this video, but what I want to do is I want to really get kind of the point across in terms of lighting. That's kind of an area that some people have kind of a difficulty conceptualizing when they're approaching their scenes, okay? We're coming a lot of times from the coloring standpoint of filling in entire areas. So if there were kind of shapes that were defined by outlines, what we'd be doing is just coloring in separate areas, kind of like a stained glass or something like that. But when you're looking at something like a landscape, where you have all these continuous types of images, and we're talking about scene lighting now. We're talking about three-dimensional objects as opposed to kind of a flat two-dimensional one. That's where some people have problems, okay? I'm going to show you an easy approach to that, though, okay? So let's just start right here, okay? So when we're looking at something like this, okay, now if it's running water or something like that, or a lake, or a given sky, whole vast areas, it could be a whole meadow. One of the things that we can do in order to kind of establish effective lighting in a given area is not to kind of approach the entire object as one whole space in terms of something to be colored uniformly, okay? So, that being said, like in an area like this, okay, let's take just the rocks of this cascading falls, side falls, and ledge right here, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to establish... No, I'm just using a very pale gray on there. I hope, it shows up in the camera right here. But this is a very, very light gray, okay? What I'm doing is I'm just taking that and I'm establishing kind of a foundation coat. I always often call it a base layer of color, okay? Now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of filling in these rocks right here, okay? Now, we don't have to leave the waterfalls completely white, and I won't, but just in terms of getting this point across right here, what I'm doing is I'm just going in and I'm coloring in some of those objects, okay? And if you have a really pale value or color like this one, it's a very light value of gray, we can just color in the whole thing. Sometimes I'll leave, some areas of white on tops of the rocks. But see, what I'm starting to do is I'm starting to establish kind of the lighting scheme of the scene. In falling water types of situations, what I really like to do is I like to establish the water as kind of one of the most reflective things in the scene. So I won't color those out too much, but I can put some color on them, otherwise they just looks too stark white, okay? So if you can see, I'm kind of making those waterfalls stand out some by taking the area around it and making them dark, okay? So you see that? See how the water is already kind of standing out? Now here, I'll show you one without it and one with, okay? So we can start kind of establishing that lighting scheme of the scene, okay? The rocks are not as reflective as the water, see it right there? And it's really quite subtle, so it's really easy to, apply this type of color without having to make too much of a commitment to the overall value of it. Alright, now let's look at the sky here, okay? One of the things I like for sky and water, which is in a lot of, different scenes, but even if it's not water, it's an area of your land, and you can do this the same way, but watch what I'll do here. Instead of approaching that sky as one entire thing to be colored in completely uniform, you would, when you look at the sky, you might see kind of a clear blue sky and it'll be completely uniform. But oftentimes there's variation in the sky. And if you have that variation, you can potentially make your scene that much richer, okay? Now definitely down in the water, you'll see right here, what I meant by that is I kind of left a little streak of light, like that. Let's do that same type of thing in the water, okay? Where do you do it? I'm looking at these rocks right here, and right at the base of the rocks there's some shadows that I've drawn into the design, so I'm just going and reiterating it a little bit. And I'm going to vary this some, okay? So I'll put a few streaks in the water, and it's doing nothing, not doing anything more than that. Okay? So we have our basic foundation right here, okay? And I mean, that wasn't very much coloring at all. The thing is that you just have to vary it, okay? Don't just color in like that and just, you know, in one area, okay? Kind of vary it somewhat. You can do it in colored pencils. I'm using glossy cardstock, but this same concept here would apply to whatever type of medium you're using. If this is on a matte paper, you can do grayscale or just lighter tones of pastels in there, but just retain some of the lightness of your paper, okay? So don't apply things just completely uniform, okay? So just vary it a little bit, which doesn't mean that it's harder to do. You know, there's no vast, really serious decisions to make here. It just means to vary it some. And, you know, you can make some areas darker in another scene. I can do this exact same scene again, but I can leave some areas darker and some areas lighter. Just vary it a little bit so that it says that light is hitting, you know, wherever you want it to hit. But on waterfalls, again, I do like to keep my running water light, because it should be kind of the focal point of the scene. You know, it's a very dramatic type of visual, so it should be the star of the scene. So it's like kind of putting the spotlight on it. But that being said, water, you know, and that kind of frothing, churning water is often more reflective of light than other types of scenes, objects within the scene. I don't know, if you go to Yosemite and you get that white granite, you know, that's quite reflective too, but falling water and, you know, that bubble, all those bubbles in there would be quite reflective of light. So they're often the lightest things. Often people make the mistake of saying, okay, let me see, water is blue, so they just color in the whole thing blue, and it's darker than the surrounding area. So unless you're kind of, stamping out some kind of really polluted stream or something like that, it would be white, you know, because of all the oxygen in it and that churning of it. Okay? All right, so let's just do the same thing here, okay? And I'm just using, if I didn't mention it, just this London fog memento. It's a very... memento inks in general are very good. They're very slippery, and on something like glossy paper, they just really apply in a very nice application, because the inks are very, very thick in terms of their consistency, whatever, viscosity, whatever it is. Okay, so again, applying this down. See, my waterfalls are here, 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 here. Now I will start varying this a little bit more when I get into a darker gray. Sometimes you can't get in here with this, like a tool like this one. This happens to be the stylus tool by Color Box, using the white foam tip. Okay, let me get some of this on my water, otherwise it's a little bit too stark. Try not to fill it up too much, you know. Add some of it down where, you know, there's some kind of shade drawn into the design. You know, I have that texture of, you know, those cascades in there, but it's a very delicate one. All right, that is that for that one. We've got our lighting established in this one now. Okay, it's very easy, you know, lighting, but you just have to take a look and think about those things to be colored in a little bit differently if you're just kind of starting off on scene lighting, okay? Just retain some light within that space, be it a meadow, a lake, whatever, a rooftop or something like that. And chances are you've already been doing that, but you just haven't thought of it as lighting. Oftentimes people color things in completely, and they add a little vignette around it with a darker tone. Well, what that looks like is it makes it look more rounded, because you have that sides that are a little bit more in shadow. It's like my hand here, you know. There's different areas in shadow, and the top sides of it are dark, you know, lighter, but it's darker on the edges right here. Well, I have side lighting on my studio, you know, my desk here, but that makes things a little bit more rounded and varied, right? And so that is really people are doing it, but they're just not thinking of it. So a lot of times people think they have a hard time with scene lighting, even though they've been doing it all along. They just have to start thinking about it like that, and it kind of makes more sense. Okay, so down here in the water, okay, I've already added a lot of texture on this one in my previous video because I used a water pattern stamp like that, kind of as a shading tool, but I'll kind of follow suit like this. I'll leave some of it a little bit lighter than, other areas, okay? Same thing, we have a tiny ribbon of sky up here. There's not too much room up there for, blue skies or whatever color skies you want to do this in, but it's up there nevertheless, and it's good to render it with some sort of color. But here we have it right there. Okay, so we've just retained a little bit of light throughout here. I like to, now in this one right here, we do have kind of a little bit more of an area at the base of the waterfall because it's stamped higher up, okay? So I'm leaving the bottom of it fairly light because I like to have that kind of misting, churning water down there where the, the falling water impacts, the surface. Okay, now I have these rocks in here along this lake, okay? Let's fill that in a little bit. Fill in a little bit of shadows, right here, underneath the lakeside coves. But just don't color everything in, and that's really my main point, okay? Don't color everything in. A lot of people see this water right here, and they're not thinking visually. They're thinking, with logic, but it's not. It's through an association, though. They're saying, okay, that water is all blue, so they just color that whole thing in blue. But, think of it in terms of light, okay? Or, I don't know, observe light, I should say. Okay, if your moon is going to be kind of the light source in a scene, it would make sense to retain it as something that is lighter than the other areas. So all I'm doing is I'm just kind of going in and coloring around it. Sometimes it's a little bit too stark white, so I like to mellow it down a little bit with a little bit of streak over the top like that. All right, now this one's really going to be fun because we actually have room for kind of a physical light source like that. So let me go in here and I'll fill in some additional tone around this waterfall. Let's get a little bit of water. Water's falling down like that, so I like to move my streaks kind of in that direction. Coloring in the space around that waterfall, so that waterfall stands out a little bit more. See that? It doesn't stand out too much because I'm using a very light value right now. Okay. Same thing, the rocks right next to that. Some foreground rocks and the boulders and trees. With trees, large staff. I don't use that one enough. I need to use that more often. There's so many designs now. It's there's just so many combinations that we can do. I mean, even with the original 100 and something designs that I came out with way back when, as much as I've used them over the course of 25 years, I'm still learning compositions with them all the time. And this one right here, this one's using a lot of those first designs. All these ones from here on down are with that first release that I did, and I've never done this combination of them before. It's one of the fun things about the use of this system of designs is that I know I drew them, but as far as being a user of them in compositions and whatnot, I mean, I'll never get close to putting into application all of the different variations that we can do with them I'm seeing new ones all the time, especially when I, change the format. I don't work in half-page scenes very often. And, I don't know, doing that, I should do some full-page ones, but even on the quarter-size page, I mean, that would fit on a quarter-size piece of paper like this. I could even have that moon up there. And I've just never done that one before. I didn't plan it out or anything like that. I just put all the stamps in front of me and, kind of just conceived of it in the moment. Okay, I love waterfalls at night and that type of scheme. Look at this. I mean, I'm going to add more tone onto these ones right here, but I've certainly established the lighting scheme, the foundational lighting scheme at least. Things can change around a little bit, but that's 4 scenes right there, and along with the half-page one. Here's a bigger one right here. It's still half-page. It's just kind of on the horizontal instead of the elongated vertical format. Variation again. Retain some light up here. Okay. And let's find our water. Here's our falling water right here. Here's a pool of water down here. Another waterfall right here. And our pool of water right here. So, this is exactly the type of thing, little pool I love to find when hiking around. I love getting into areas kind of off trail. Not if they're designated that you're not allowed to do that, but the places that I go, it's not a problem. I'm not hiking in Yosemite very often or something like that, but where it's really important to stay on the trail, with all those visitors there. But I don't know, kind of in some smaller locations and whatnot, I love going off trail and kind of finding kind of like hidden gems of little settings, here and there. Okay. I really need a re-inker for my London fog, and soon. Okay, so here's our pool down here. Okay, let's add in a little bit of that variation. Let's retain some of that light of the water, or lightness in the water area. I guess we're kind of defining light too in some ways. I guess we're retaining some of the white of the paper, actually, not of the water. We're defining light in the water. Alright, so there that is. Now, it would be easier for me to apply all my colors kind of, just one at a time, because my scenes start drying, and it's kind of nice to have this page kind of moist when you start bringing in those other colors. But that looks pretty good for the gray here. See, my kind of waterfalls are kind of standing out a little bit more. But now let's make them stand out even more. Let's move up into my next value. I'm just going with a slightly darker gray in the number 12 Marvy gray. Alright, I want to re-inker for this one. Let me hold on. Okay, just going with a wetter pad will make this much easier. I don't think I've re-inked this one in quite a while, so it's pretty dry. These re-inkers right here, as much ink as I use, I have rarely ran out of re-inkers. Only in workshops, like with the black or something like that, but those will last you a really long time, even if you use as much ink as I do. Okay, now what I've done is I've kind of established some areas of light and dark in here, and I'll try to retain most of that, okay? With this next color, I'll try to oscillate things a little bit. And hopefully as I apply this color is not that much darker than the London fog, but hopefully you can kind of see the difference as I go along here. You can also kind of toggle back and forth, of course, on this, these YouTube videos, just to see a little bit of the difference. The first color was probably like a, I don't know, I'm going to guess like a 15% gray. This one's probably more like a 25 or so. You can kind of see it pretty good, I guess. Now remember, these don't have to just all be grayscale scenes, okay? When I established this kind of lighting scheme in the scene, I mean, I can go, this is kind of more of a neutral. I picked up a little bit of blue when I was streaking across that other moon in the other scene, but I could still make this a warm-toned whatever scene if I wanted to. I can take it into the blues, whatever, because this is kind of just grayscale right now. Okay, see that kind of coming around and that lighting within the scene. We're controlling light, we're defining light through the use of shadows, so it's not really light per se, but it's, it's just contrast, really. But it gives the illusion of objects being lit in some way. Okay, now here's what we start doing, though. I didn't really mention this, but just think about, see all these rocks in here? I have them already, I've given us a big head start in terms of lighting. Where there's more shade and stippling dots, all I'm doing is I'm just kind of reiterating that, okay? So if this was like a rock right here, just think about it coloring when you start moving into your darker tones, mid-tones, darker tones. I guess this, gray can be considered a mid-tone. Just color the bottom sides of them, if you want it to look like things are being top illuminated, or just, refer to the designs. And if you see them kind of darker, there's more dots or shadow, solid areas, then just go and color those in. If there's an area on those rocks that are lighter, just leave them light if you want to. And then what you'll do is you'll develop your kind of three-dimensional aspect of those objects, okay? So things look a little bit more dimensional because they're shaded on a certain side of them, usually on the bottom side, than in another area of them, okay? So much down here in the water now, too. Okay, so I'm just kind of adding some of those streaks in there like so. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or I don't know, 10, dozen, something like that. Okay, so we have that scene lighting. And then we put a little bit more in the sky. Okay, something like that. Alright. Let's go to the next one. Let me work from bottom up on this one. Oops, I'm starting to get real inky fingers here. I'm getting streaks in my scene here. So this right here too, I just kind of inked it up like that. Maybe leave a little bit of light there like that. So there's more variation instead of kind of this uniform coloring of it. So just do a little bit less coloring. Leave the tops of your objects, maybe a little bit lighter. Vary your water, okay? And I always say, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it'll change things, but in terms of having some lighting, it just doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong, okay? So it's not like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to leave that area light, that area dark on that rock or meadow or something like that. Just as long as there's kind of some variation, it'll look more richer, it'll look richer in terms of your overall value scheme and lighting scheme, therefore lighting scheme, just with variation rather than kind of monotony or uniformity. And when I say that, I'm not just saying that kind of as an instructional, I'm telling that to myself as well. One of the things that I need to start doing too is, not on a scene like this where this is really narrow, but when I have a large kind of meadow or something like that, you know, I usually keep things a little bit lighter in the middle and darker on the outside, but I really need to vary things a little bit more. You know, there's different types of, you know, clouds, and there, you know, there might be lighting over here, and it might be really dark or something like that. I need to have more kind of unpredictable variation like that. And I need to start employing that in my scenes. Okay, now to create a little bit of separation between this background here and this foreground. I want to push this back, so I'm kind of darkening in some area right here, and then I'll kind of transition it. Yeah, I said to kind of leave some areas light and dark. Okay, so see, I'm darkening it right here, but I'll leave it light up there. So that's your variation. Okay, right here, here's this foreground one. I'll leave that top area a little bit darker, and maybe I'll make the bottom area a little bit darker. Okay, lighter on top of that foreground rock, and darker on the bottom of it. This gray is getting me some pretty dark grayscale tones here. A little bit darker than I thought it would be, but that's fine. I need some of that tone and that kind of vertical sweeping motion. See, I'm kind of, this motion is like this right here, okay? It's kind of like hatching like that. It's not going like this, okay? Alright, let's go around this moon. Let's make that moon stand out a little bit lighter by making the area around it a little bit darker. Now my clouds, I'm going to leave them a little bit lighter facing the moon, so these clouds above the moon are bottom lit, these clouds below are top lit, because of the location of our light source. Okay, put a little bit more tone around there. If I want those waterfalls to stand out a little bit more, I'll just make them a little bit darker, or the area around it darker. Okay. I like shadows down at the base of things, so I'll add more tone underneath these closer boulders with trees. Okay. Like so. Alright, so we have that. I was able to achieve some pretty dark tones with that. I was kind of surprised. And maybe I'll add a little bit more here too. Okay. I think what happened is I had a lot of the previous mementos still in my tip here, so I'm getting into more of the pure Marvy, which is darker. So it's allowing me to go darker. Okay. So add it down here in the shadows. I like to kind of achieve a pretty full saturation of whatever color I'm working in. So if I can go darker with the color that I'm working on, I'll add more of that color before moving on to, you know, just an inherently darker one. And after this, you know, this gray, it might be black if I choose to go that far. I don't know if I will. I might want to keep it more kind of grayscale so I can kind of move into some different color schemes without getting too dark too fast. But, I don't know, maybe we'll leave one of them or two of them in monochromatic gray. I do love the look of black and white photography and scenes in general. Okay, going with these quarter size page ones here. Watch how these kind of all these different waterfalls will stand out a little bit more by making the areas around them darker, okay? What you do is you, if you want something, we used to call it pop in art. We'd say, oh yeah, you put that little area right next to it and it makes that thing pop. What they just mean is, they've taken the area, around our light source like that. Okay, coloring it in like that. Like that. And hopefully it makes that pop. Okay, so it looks a little bit darker now. It really stands out more. Okay, same thing right around here. Okay. Maybe bring some tone up into that waterfall a little bit. Let's make this one pop, okay? Make it really stand out. Okay, coming around. The lighting scheme's pretty, pretty well established. I mean, we established it with even one color, but it's really getting established with two values now, gray and darker gray. So this little variation, instead of coloring the whole thing, you have a little bit left, and that's lighting. Coloring the whole thing, and that's just coloring, okay? So just retaining some areas that are a little bit lighter than others, okay? And then suddenly you have coloring and lighting. Alright, so let's move along here. Kind of at the base of rocks, I really like to add that nice shadow down there. And there is shadows at the base of the rocks, so you're just kind of reiterating that, okay? Alright, so let's make that one stand out a little bit more. That falling water. That was the side falls. Okay. And final one right here. These lakeside cove impressions have tone and kind of shadow. So I am establishing additional tone where that shadow is, that shade. Okay, so you don't have to invent anything, just look at the designs, look at the impressions, see where it's a little bit darker, and add your tones in those darker areas. Alright, see that? Kind of got lighting in there. Maybe I'll get a little bit of gray in there, just so that area right at the base of the waterfall isn't so stark white. Alright, so let's take a look at these. 2 colors, 5 scenes, and 5 scenes that are now kind of established with scene lighting. Okay? I mean, it's just the beginning of it. We have other colors that we can go with, you know, so the scene lighting will become stronger, at least as far as the contrast goes. But now, instead of just... get that glare out of there, but we can kind of see in every one of these now. Do you see where the waterfall, the falling water portion of the waterfall stamp, okay? They all kind of stand out because of the, let me try to get that glare out of there. Because of the tone around them, okay? Start off light, you know, so you don't have to go too dark or anything like that. Retain that lightness, but look how dramatic those that falling water is, you know. It draws the eye. It makes it look, you know, kind of in a figurative way. They're kind of like spotlit, okay? Because they're lit, because we have adjusted our shading to kind of go right up to those areas. So I like my scenes to look like the light is really coming from within the scene, like we are looking at you know, some kind of natural area, and as far as these types of things go, there would be reflected light and coming back at our eye light. So I like those areas to really stand out. Okay. Now, especially with something like these 3 and this one right here, we don't have like a formal light source like this moon up here. So, in a sense, this ends up being kind of our light source within the scene, even though it's supposed to be, you know, represent reflected light. You know, there's supposed to be something up, a sun or whatever, or moon, you know, reflecting off the surface and coming back at us like that. So, anyways, that is our kind of basics right here as far as scene lighting, and what we'll do in our next couple videos, we'll go into the coloring of these, and we'll start to check out some different color schemes that we can use with these ones. We'll go cool with a couple of them, and we'll try to go warm with the others, and we'll take a look and see what that looks like, okay? So anyways, easy scene lighting right here. If you have a light source, keep it light. And if you don't, on waterfall types of scenery, leave the waterfall a little bit light, like, you know, for right now, or lighter than the surrounding area. You can go and, you know, we can add more color into it. We can add that blue into it or something like that into it, but let's keep it fairly light, you know, with your first couple applications of color that you lay down. And just make sure that they are the things that are standing out and they don't get darker, you know, than the surrounding area where they won't stand out at all. Okay, so anyways, hope that comes in handy as far as scene lighting goes with your falling water imagery. And remember, I'm just going with grayscale right here, just, you know, for the sake of kind of, you know, an expeditious kind of approach to this right here, but we can always build it up with different types of colors too. Okay?